Point Roberts is a census-designated place in Whatcom County, Washington, United States. It has a post office, with the zip code of 98,281, whose zip code tabulation area had a population of 1,314 at the 2010 census. Point Roberts is a part of the mainland United States but is not physically connected to it, making it a land exclave of the U.S. It is located on the southernmost tip of the Tsawwassen Peninsula, south of Delta, British Columbia, a suburb of Vancouver, and can be reached by land from the rest of the United States only by traveling through Canada. It can be reached directly from the rest of Washington and the U.S. by crossing Boundary Bay by sea or air. History. The first Europeans to see Point Roberts were members of the 1791 expedition of Francisco de Eliza. The maps produced as a result of Eliza's explorations depicted Point Roberts as Isla de Cepeda or Isla de Cepeda. Quote, in 1792 to the British expedition of George Vancouver and the Spanish expedition of Dionisio Alcala Galiano encountered one another near Point Roberts. In the morning of June 13, 1792, the two ships under Galiano sailed into Boundary Bay and verified that Point Roberts was not an island, which was thus renamed Punta Cepeda. They then sailed around Point Roberts and immediately encountered HMS Chatham, the second ship of Vancouver's expedition. The two parties made contact and soon agreed to share information and work together in mapping the Strait of Georgia. Point Roberts acquired its present name from Vancouver, who named it after his friend Henry Roberts, who had originally been given command of the expedition. Point Roberts assumed its present political status in 1846, when the Oregon Treaty extended the 49th parallel as the boundary between American and British territory from the Rocky Mountains to Georgia. Strait. Treaty history specific to Point Roberts. After years of joint occupation of the disputed area between Mexican California and Russian America known as the Oregon Country to the Americans, and as the Columbia District to the British, American expansionists like U.S. Senator Edward A. Hannigan of Indiana urged U.S. President James K. Polk to annex the entire Oregon country up to latitude 54 degrees 40 N, as the Democrats had been elected on the slogan 54-40 It, while his government asserted that the title of America to the entire territory was unquestionable even though there was only one American resident north of the Columbia Basin. Polk and Secretary of State James Buchanan made an offer of a boundary at 49 degrees with the line straight across Vancouver Island, with no commercial privilege to be granted to the British south of the line, with the exception of free ports on Vancouver Island. This offer was rejected by the British and withdrawn by the U.S. shortly thereafter. On April 18, 1846, notice was forwarded to London that the U.S. Congress had adopted a joint resolution abrogating the Treaty of 1818 which provided for joint occupancy. The British emissary, Richard Pakenham, had previously been advised that the last concession that could be expected of the United States was in bending the boundary at the 49th parallel, around the southern end of Vancouver Island. Fort Victoria was viewed as the future center for settlements on the island. It was deemed necessary around this point in time to give up territory on the lower mainland to keep Vancouver Island part of British North America. Lord Aberdeen, British Foreign Secretary, proposed a treaty making the 49th parallel the boundary to the sea, giving Great Britain the whole of Vancouver Island. The Treaty of Oregon was concluded on June 15, 1846. The acceptance of the 49th parallel as the international boundary was concluded without precise knowledge of the effects that it would ultimately have. Later, as the Boundary Commission was surveying the line, The British government realized that the peninsula of Point Roberts would be an isolated part of the United States. The British Foreign Office instructed Captain James Prevost, the British Boundary Commissioner, to inform his American counterpart of the situation and request that Point Roberts be left to Britain, because of the great inconvenience it would be to the United States. If the American Boundary Commission was reluctant, Prevost was instructed to offer some equivalent compensation by a slight alteration of the line of boundary on the mainland. It is not known how the American commissioner responded, but Point Roberts became part of the United States. Relationship with Canada. In the 1858 Fraser Gold Rush, Point Roberts was briefly settled by prospectors from Victoria, BC, attempting to avoid tax collection. The settlement was called Robertstown and consisted of 6 wooden buildings, including a store and saloon, but lasted less than a year. In 1949, there was talk about Point Roberts seceding from the USA and joining Canada, but this never happened. In 1973, a drought caused the wells to run dry and created tensions between the American and Canadian residents of Point Roberts. The Americans threatened to cut off the Canadian residents' water supply and hung up signs saying, "Canadians go home," unless the Canadian municipality of Delta agreed to provide water. Eventually an arrangement was made, and an agreement signed on August 28, 1987, whereby the Point Roberts Water District would purchase raw water on an annual basis from the Greater Vancouver Water District. Delta Fire Department also provides assistance to the Point Roberts Volunteer Fire Department when requested, and until 1988, BC provided telephone service. Geography. Point Roberts is a U.S. exclave bordered by Canada and the waters of Boundary Bay. It is 22 miles south of downtown Vancouver, British Columbia. Point Roberts is part of the U.S. because it lies south of the 49th parallel, which constitutes the Canada-U.S. border in that area. Point Roberts borders the municipality of Delta in British Columbia. Boundary Bay lies to the east of Point Roberts and the Strait of Georgia to the south and west. The U.S. portion of the peninsula is about 2 miles from north to south and about 3 miles from east to west. It has an area of 4.884 square miles. Demographics. As of the 2010 United States Census, there were 1,314 people, 678 households, and 372 families residing in the ZIP. There were 2,068 housing units, only 678 of which were occupied. The racial makeup of the ZIP was 91.9% white, 0.8% African American, 0.8% Native American, 4.5% Asian, 0.3% from other races, and 1.7% from 2 or more races. Hispanics or Latinos of any race were 2.4% of the population. The age distribution was 16.2% under 20, 3.0% from 20 to 24, 16.2% from 25 to 44, 40.7% from 45 to 64, and 23.9% who were 65 or older. The median age was 52.7 years. The median income for a household in the ZIP was $58,672. The median income for a family was $75,724, and the per capita income was $39,696. During the summer the population swells to about 4,500, most of the visitors being vacationing Canadians. Point Roberts' population includes descendants of Icelandic immigrants who first settled there in the 1890s. Education. Point Roberts Primary School, the only school on the point, provides only kindergarten and first, second and third grades. From 4th grade on, American children must take a 40-minute ride through British Columbia, crossing back into the United States at Blaine, Washington. Canadian children can attend school in Delta. Transportation. The only authorized land access to Canada from Point Roberts is Tsawwassen Drive, a major thoroughfare northward that becomes 56th Street in Canada. Point Roberts also has a small airport and a large marina for air and water access. These 2 point facilities allow direct access to the rest of Washington state without the need to enter Canada. Economy. Many of the area's businesses serve weekend and recreational visitors from Greater Vancouver. Canadians visit for cheaper American gasoline, alcohol, and food when the Canadian dollar is strong. Americans from Point Roberts do the same in Canada. Many Canadians visited its bars and nightclubs on Sundays until Sunday drinking was legalized in British Columbia in 1986. The local post office and several private companies rent many post office boxes to individuals and businesses from the Greater Vancouver area, who find it a convenient and fast way to receive mail and parcels from the United States without paying for cross-border shipping costs. Because of having to go through the international border twice to get to the rest of the U.S., some have called it the best gated community in the U.S. Residents enjoy a low crime rate at the cost of a high local security presence and other inconveniences. There is no hospital, doctor, dentist, pharmacist, or veterinarian, and because American health insurers will not pay for treatment given by Canadian providers, Point Roberts residents usually seek emergency medical care in Bellingham, Washington, although Vancouver is closer. The international border also purportedly makes Point Roberts often used by the United States Federal Witness Protection Program. Climate. Point Roberts lies within a depression created by Vancouver Island, the North Shore Mountains surrounding Vancouver, and the North Cascades. This microclimate provides some of the mildest weather in the Pacific Northwest, with annual precipitation of about 1,000 millimeters. Point Roberts enjoys more sunny days and a milder climate than its neighbors. Geology. Beneath Point Roberts, the bedrock of the Tsawwassen Formation was deposited as an alluvial plain containing layers of sediments consisting of silt, sand and gravel, and peat. During the last 60 million years the sediments were compacted and folded by mountain-building forces resulting from continental drift to form strata of siltstone, sandstone, conglomerate and coal. During recent geologic history, the Tsawwassen Formation was overridden by 4 or more glaciations. Point Roberts consists of a series of the resulting glacial sediments resting upon the Tsawwassen Formation. The lowest glacial sediments are from Salmon Springs or older glaciations. At the peak of the most recent glaciation, the main ice sheet was in excess of 7,000 feet thick as it moved southward between Vancouver Island and the Canadian Coast Range and down the Strait of Georgia. A smaller lobe of the Continental Glacier in excess of 5,000 feet traveled down the Fraser River floodplains, merging with the main ice sheet over the Greater Vancouver area and Whatcom and Skagit counties. The coalesced continental ice sheet traveled south, terminating in the vicinity of Chehalis, Washington. Relatively impermeable Vashon glacial lodgment till was plastered over the advance outwashes the weight of the 7,000-foot thick plus Strait of Georgia ice lobe moved southward over approximately 10,000 years. Point Roberts, Tsawwassen, and part of British Columbia extending past English Bluff actually comprised an island at the close of the Vashon glaciation, approximately 11,000 years ago. As the ice sheets melted, The thinner Fraser Lobe began to float while the Strait of Georgia Lobe acted as a dam, forming a lake under the Fraser Lobe. Sediment settling from the melting, floating ice resulted in the accumulation of 300 feet or more of glacial marine drift over much of western Whatcom County. This glacial marine drift is generally soft and was not consolidated by the weight of the glacier. A discontinuous, thin mantle of this glacial marine drift above the glacial lodgement till has been identified sporadically across Point Roberts. The uppermost layer of glacial sediments consists of recessional sand, silt, and gravel deposited as the Strait of Georgia ice lobe receded. Since the recession of the glaciers, the Fraser River has deposited deltaic sediments on the north and easterly side of the Point Roberts Tsawwassen Island, connecting it to the greater Vancouver mainland. At some locations, these sediments have been eroded or removed, exposing the lodgement till parks and features neighborhoods, South Beach Estates, Bells Grove, Crystal Waters, Freeman Beach, Lily Point, Maple Beach, Waters Platte, Ocean View Estates, Seabride Farm Cottages. Telecommunications. Until 1988, Point Roberts telephone numbers were in British Columbia's area code 604 and served by BCTEL, the local telephone company for most of British Columbia. It was served by an exchange for Delta, resulting in the oddity of calls from British Columbia being local calls, while calls from Washington and the rest of the United States were billed as international calls. In 1988, Point Roberts was shifted to area code 206, the area code for most of western Washington, using exchange 945, at the expense of losing the ability to make local calls to any other exchange in either country. Along with the rest of Whatcom County, Point Roberts moved to area code 360 in 1995. The local regular service telecom provider is Whidbey Telecom. Although Point Roberts is nominally part of the Seattle television market, the only over-the-air stations available in the town come from the Metro Vancouver region and Bellingham, Washington. Cable television in Point Roberts is provided by Delta Cable, a subsidiary of Canadian cable company Eastlink. Delta Cable offers most major broadcast stations from Vancouver and some stations from Seattle and Bellingham. Delta Cable also offers a selection of popular American cable networks, but no digital cable service or Canadian specialty channels, as they are not licensed to serve the United States. Both Whidbey Telecom and Delta Cable provide broadband internet access to residents of Point Roberts. Mobile telephone service is provided by a variety of companies, both American and Canadian. In 2012, KRPI received approval from the FCC to relocate its transmitter from Ferndale to Point Roberts. The move is expected to improve coverage to its target market of Vancouver, BC. Notable residents: Glenn Hanlon, a former National Hockey League goaltender and former ice hockey coach. Michael S. McLean, Emmy Award winner and former Hollywood director, editor and producer. Kakutamana, Gambian-born soccer player on the Vancouver Whitecaps FC. He was adopted by an American family and lives in Point Roberts to fulfill his residency requirements in order to become an American citizen in September 2016. Notable past residents: Alexander Mogilny, a former National Hockey League forward. Pavel Bure, a former National Hockey League forward. Dave Nonis, National Hockey League former senior vice president and general manager with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Margaret Lawrence, P. Canadian novelist and short story writer. John Tortorella, former ice hockey coach with Vancouver Canucks.